protest movements. As for the random unorganized forces and movements will perhaps make a noise and pave the way for revolution, but cannot harvest any fruits. And maybe this is what happened in Egypt exactly. The forces that played a role in preparing for the revolution and made sacrifices during the revolution itself is not exactly the forces that reaped the political revolution. Second, fragmentation and lack of unified political and programmatic vision of revolution forces, making them easy to sharp political polarization between the more organized and strong political Islam and the remnants of the former regime. Third, the most conflicting parties currently in power are enemies, most conflicting parties, Islamic groups and remains of the past regime. The most conflicting parties currently in power are enemies and opponents of democracy, and also are enemies of the revolution forces represented in the youth and social and political movements, and their relationship to revolution force is using one. Particularly the political Islam, which greatly benefited so far from the revolutionary forces and dealt in the same time to prevent the possibility to organize themselves. Fourth, poor resources and capacities. The forces of revolution are dependent on middle class and broad sectors of laborers, lacking resources and capacities to and lead the social and political process, and at the same time fighting the political and electoral process to translate its presence to a real actor in position of power and decision making in country. Fifth, undemocratic legal and legislative conditions in Egypt, which are hostile to the right to freedom of association. It is also hostile to the freedom of thought and creativity, information and exchange of information, which imposes many restrictions on the possibility of launching new initiatives and minimizing current initiatives and places them under the law. Six, the very hard and bad socio-economic situation in the country, which prevent the majority of the Egyptian people to participate in the general affairs, especially in the ordinary time, not in the revolution period, of course. Finally, the unfavorable and contradictory international environment, where the international community and specifically Western Europe and America speak a lot about the importance of democratic transformation in the Arabic region, and at the same time they fear of the revolution, which refuses economic policies and trends and the failed development models imposed by the West in the region. So, the secret word and the magic key for the political and social actors in Egypt in order to become a real power and effective number in the equation of political life is how to organize themselves. Also, the existence of all these prejudices. And finally, the main option waiting for Arab Spring, we have, I think, many scenarios and many options, but we will stop on the main three big options. The Arab Spring future is determined by what will happen in Egypt. largest political weight in the region, and what occurs necessarily is reflected on the whole region. We are actually facing three major options. The first option involves the control of political Islam over Egypt and then gradually on the whole region, while maintaining the same political and economic choices applied to the Mubarak regime, as well as most of the existing strategic alliance, and focus on the issue of the identity. The second option is to return the old regime gradually, with its strong dictatorship, domination, while continuing the same political and strategic alliance which already exists. The third option is the option to impose a new political reality balance, allowing the basic three powers, and creates a new democratic model which allows for sharing of power and leads to push forward development process and contributes to the integration of the region with the international civilized democratic community. So, we can briefly say that the only power capable of imposing and achieving the third option is the powerful revolution or third wave force. Therefore, it is my belief that the real challenge in the coming period is how to provide political, moral, and material support to the third wave forces that adopt the civil state in the face of theocratic religious state and democratic state in the face of totalitarian, authoritarian regime, and adopt slogans of citizenship, the rule of law, and achieving social justice, freedom, and dignity for all its citizens. The biggest challenge is how democratic and liberal forces, youth, social and political movements in its emerging regulatory framework to become a strong and influential actor in the Egyptian political life equation. Thank you, and excuse me for my not very good English language.
No one would guess that English is your third language. But thank you for that fascinating look at the many challenges that Egypt faces today. Lord Hayward, would you like to take the microphone?
Alan Howard, I'm a member of the upper chamber of the UK Parliament, the House of Lords, which, just in case anybody does not fully appreciate this, is an appointed chamber. So I sit in the House of Lords along with approximately 800 other colleagues in the upper chamber on the basis of having been appointed as a member of the elite. That is, if you think the House of Lords is part of the power elite in the UK. I thought I would give a short history of how I see the changing features of social mobility in the UK over most of the past century, or at least the last 60 years. How it can be that a working class lad like myself from a northern industrial town, from a relatively impoverished background, should wind up in the British House of Lords, should be on first-name terms with presidents and prime ministers, and indeed, in my case, I have the huge great fortune of having a house in 3 different countries: a flat in London, a main house in Scotland, and a second home in France. These achievements, if they are achievements, were completely unthinkable to my parents' generation. And as I think I might show, are beginning to be unthinkable to the generation that is following, because something very strange happened in the UK. So to speak about social mobility, first of all, perhaps there should be a definition of the term. And I am taking the most up-to-date and relevant expression of this that I can find, which is from a recently published report from an all-party grouping in the UK Parliament, who say, essentially, social mobility is the extent to which where you end up in terms of income or social class is not determined where you started. Now, what has been the features of social mobility in the UK? From perhaps the end of the Great War, let us say, for convenient purposes, to divide history up into nice parcels, and knowing that, of course, in fact, it doesn't work quite as precisely as that. From maybe 1920 onwards, there were increasing opportunities for children from non-privileged elite backgrounds who did not go to the top private schools to make their way in life, to make their fame and their fortune, and to escape from the shackles of the class background. Of course, in the early part of this period, there was only one social stratification in the UK. It was social class. Now the position is far more complicated because we have social stratification by ethnicity, with all manner of immigrant groups and second generations of immigrant groups and so on. The position is nothing like as simple and as straightforward as it was to speak of these things, let us say, at the end of the Second World War in 1945 or 1950. But if I speak about that next 30-year period, which is the beginning part of my life, I was born in 1948. I'm part of the baby boomer generation that came along after the Second World War. 1947, I think, was the big boom year, and my parents are a bit slow off the mark. I was born in 1948. 4 years before I was born, one of the most important pieces of social legislation was enacted in the UK Parliament. It was the 1944 Wartime Education Act. And that piece of legislation absolutely changed the system of education in the UK. And it brought in what was known as a tripartite system of education. There were three classes and categories of schools. There were to be grammar schools that would be like the posh elite private schools that the older elite had enjoyed. There would be technical schools that would concentrate on technical education, the kind of thing that we all still believe, whether it's true or not, has been very popular and successful in Germany. I have to say that I didn't go to a grammar school. I went to a technical school. It was co-educational, whereas in my town the grammar school was for the boys and there was a similar high school for the girls. They were educated separately. My parents strongly believed that it was a good thing for boys and girls to be educated together. And in any case, I don't think I passed the exam quite well enough to have the opportunity to go to the grammar school. So I went to this middle category of school where we had a joke. We didn't know whether we passed the exam but not well enough or whether we failed it. And there was a third category of school, the secondary moderns, who were, as it were, a residual category. I will come on to that in a moment. But the creation of the grammar schools in the early 1950s was a very, very significant part in playing in many bright kids from working class and lower middle class backgrounds in the UK to succeed and do well and go on. And where did they go on to? They went on to go to university, because correspondingly, 20 years later, in the 1960s, there was a massive expansion of universities in the UK.